Welcome to the channel Chronicles of Shadows. Tonight's story is not about freedom. It is about what freedom created. It follows a boy born in chains, who escaped west into a land even more violent than slavery, and returned as the most feared gunslinger Texas had ever known. Before we begin, take a breath. This is a brutal story. Subscribe, hit the bell, and tell us in the comments which city and country you're listening from. Now listen carefully. In July of 1873, a man dressed entirely in black walked into a saloon in Dusty Creek, Texas. Tall, broad-shouldered, skin dark as burned oak, eyes that made grown men look away. Within 60 seconds, he drew his revolver and put one bullet through the skull of Thomas Birch. No warning, no mercy. Then he vanished into the white-hot afternoon. That single gunshot echoed across Texas for 2 years. By the time it ended, 18 men were dead, overseers, traders, lawmen. The newspapers called him a monster. The wanted posters called him dangerous. But the enslaved who remembered his childhood called him something else. They called him vengeance. His name was Zachariah Creed. To understand how a slave boy became Texas's most feared gunslinger, we have to go back. Not to his birth, to his mother's death. The moment the boy named Zachariah died, and something far worse took his place. The year was 1858. The place was a cotton plantation known as Whitmore Estate, 40 miles west of Houston, Texas. In that part of Texas, land was measured in acres, wealth was measured in bales, and power was measured in how many human beings a man could break without consequence. Colonel Henry Whitmore owned 3,000 acres and 112 enslaved people. He was not a colonel. He had never worn a uniform or led troops into battle. But in the South, titles could be purchased the same way slaves were, by money, reputation, and silence. Whitmore was considered respectable. His name appeared in regional newspapers beside words like prosperous and enterprising. His cotton fetched premium prices in New Orleans. His dinners were attended by judges, bankers, and men who prayed loudly on Sundays. What the newspapers never printed was the sound of the whip. They never described the scars. They never counted the bodies buried behind the quarters without markers or names. Zachariah was born on that plantation in 1847, inside a slave cabin with a dirt floor and a leaking roof. His mother's name was Abigail. Among the enslaved, Abigail was known for two things: her kindness and her voice. She worked in the main house, cooking, cleaning, serving food to people who never learned her name. As she worked, she sang. Old spirituals passed down through generations. Songs about Moses, songs about rivers, songs about a promised land no white man could touch. Her voice softened the plantation. It did not change anything, but it reminded people that something human still existed inside them. Zachariah grew up wrapped in that sound. It was the only beauty he knew. At night, when the cabin went quiet and the others slept, Abigail whispered his name to him like a secret. Zachariah, she would say. It means God remembers. She pressed her hand against his chest when she said it. He remembers every hurt, every tear, every wrong done to his children, even when men pretend they don't. Zachariah believed her. His father was sold when he was 3 years old. A strong field hand traded for land. One day he was there. The next he was gone. No goodbye. No explanation. No knowledge of whether he lived or died. That was slavery. Loss without closure. Pain without record. By the time Zachariah was 5, he was already working, too small for the fields but useful in other ways. Carrying water. Sweeping paths. Running errands for the white children who sometimes threw rocks at him for sport. If he cried, he was whipped. If he ran, he was whipped harder. He learned early how to make his face still. The man responsible for discipline on Whitmore Estate was Thomas Birch, the head overseer. Birch came from poor white stock. He owned nothing. But the plantation gave him something better than land. Power. He carried a braided leather whip with metal weights sewn into the tips. When it struck flesh, it tore instead of bruised. Birch used it daily. He said it was about order. But when he swung, he smiled. Zachariah noticed things other people missed. He noticed how Birch lingered after the screaming stopped. How his breathing sounded almost pleased. How cruelty for some men was not a duty, but a pleasure. Zachariah was 7 years old on the day his mother died. It was a Tuesday in August. The heat lay over the plantation like a curse. Abigail was in the main house carrying a heavy ceramic jug of milk across the dining room floor. Her hands were slick with sweat. The jug slipped, shattered. Milk spread across the polished wood. Mrs. Whitmore screamed. Not because she was hurt. Not because she was afraid. She screamed because something she owned had been broken. and someone needed to pay. She called for Thomas Birch. Zachariah was outside sweeping the front path when he heard his mother scream. He ran before thinking. Slaves were not allowed to run near the main house, but instinct moved faster than fear. He rounded the corner and saw them. Abigail was tied to a wooden post behind the kitchen, her dress torn open down the back. Thomas Birch stood behind her with the whip coiled in his hand. Mrs. Whitmore watched from the shade, fanning herself. Colonel Whitmore stood beside her, arms crossed, bored. This was routine. Birch raised the whip. The first strike split skin. Abigail screamed. The second strike landed before the echo of the first faded. Zachariah tried to move. An overseer grabbed him from behind. "Watch," the man said. "Watch what happens when your kind forgets its place." Zachariah watched. He counted every stroke. 37. By the 20th, his mother's screams turned into moans. By the 30th, her body began to sag. By the 37th, she was barely conscious. Birch stopped, breathing hard. Sweat poured down his face. Colonel Whitmore nodded once, satisfied, and walked away. They left Abigail tied to the post. No one was allowed to help her until nightfall. By then it was too late. She died before sunrise. Zachariah was not allowed to attend her burial. He was sent to the fields that same morning. 7 was old enough, Colonel Whitmore decided. There was no time for grief. But something inside Zachariah changed forever. That night, lying in the place where his mother used to sleep, he made a promise. Not to God. To himself. One day he would find Thomas Birch. He would find Henry Whitmore. He would find every man who stood there and watched. And when he did, they would remember his name. After Abigail died, the plantation felt different to Zachariah. Not quieter. Not kinder. Sharper. The days still began before sunrise. The horn still blew. Cotton still tore at his fingers. Overseers still rode the rows on horseback, watching for anyone who slowed. But the small protections his mother's presence had offered were gone. No one sang anymore. Zachariah worked the fields with a hollow steadiness that unsettled the adults around him. Children usually cried when the work became too much. They begged. They collapsed. They learned helplessness early. Zachariah did none of that. He worked. He watched. He remembered. The only thing anchoring him to the world was his sister. Her name was Grace. She was 6 years old when their mother died, small for her age, with quick hands and nervous eyes. She slept curled against Zachariah at night, clutching his shirt like it was the only thing keeping her from disappearing. After Abigail's death, Zachariah became something he had never planned to be. A parent. He saved pieces of his own food for Grace. He stood between her and older boys when tempers flared. He whispered their mother's stories at night, repeating them carefully, exactly as Abigail had once told them. Moses crossed the water. God hears. God remembers. Grace believed him. She had to. Zachariah believed less with each passing day. In 1859, Colonel Whitmore needed money. The war talk had not yet reached Texas in full force, but cotton prices were unstable, and Whitmore had his eye on more land west of the Brazos. The solution, as always, was simple. Sell people. A slave trader arrived one morning in a polished carriage. His name was William Crawford, a man with clean boots, soft hands, and a voice that sounded almost friendly. Traders like him moved from plantation to plantation, converting families into currency. Crawford walked the quarters with Whitmore as if browsing livestock. He examined teeth, squeezed arms, asked questions about temperament. When he saw Grace, he stopped. "That one," he said. "How much for the girl?" Zachariah stood 20 feet away, frozen. Slaves were not allowed to interfere in negotiations. They were not allowed to speak. They were not allowed to exist as witnesses to their own destruction. Whitmore named a price. Crawford countered. They settled at $400. Grace was sold before sunset. When the trader's men lifted her into the wagon, she screamed, "Zach! Zach, don't let them take me!" Zachariah ran. An overseer struck him across the head with the butt of a rifle. When he woke, the wagon was gone. Grace was gone. No one told him where she was taken. No one thought he deserved to know. That night, Zachariah did not cry. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling something inside him turn cold and permanent. 2 new names joined the list in his head. Henry Whitmore. William Crawford. The next years blurred together in pain and repetition. Zachariah grew taller, leaner, harder. His body adapted to suffering in ways that frightened the overseers. The whip scarred him weekly, sometimes daily, but his eyes never dulled. Thomas Birch noticed. "That one's dangerous," Birch said once, watching Zachariah work. "He's not broken. We should sell him before he grows." They didn't get the chance. In 1860, whispers of war reached even the fields. Slaves passed fragments of information in the dark. Talk of northern armies, freedom, the end of buying and selling. Colonel Whitmore responded with fear. Patrols increased. Punishments became public. Any talk of escape was met with blood. Then came the theft. A piece of bread. That was all. Zachariah's closest friend on the plantation was a boy named Samuel, a year older, quick to smile even when life gave him nothing to smile about. Samuel believed hate only gave the masters more power. "I won't let them own my heart," he whispered one night. Samuel stole bread because a younger child was sick. For that crime, Whitmore ordered an execution. All the slaves were gathered in front of the main house. Whitmore spoke calmly as if explaining a lesson. "This boy stole from me," he said, "and theft cannot be tolerated." Thomas Birch tied the rope. Samuel was hanged from the pecan tree. The drop was short. It took almost 5 minutes for him to die. Zachariah was forced to watch. Whitmore ordered the body left hanging for 3 days. On the third night, after the guards grew careless, Zachariah cut Samuel down. He buried him behind the quarters with his bare hands. Then he made his final decision. There was nothing left here. No mother. No sister. No friend. No future. That night, Zachariah ran. He crawled under the fence at the western edge of the plantation and moved toward the dark. He had no supplies. No plan. Only the certainty that if he stayed, he would die slowly. 4 days later, the dogs found his scent. He hid in a hole along a dry creek bed, pressed into the earth as hounds circled above him. He did not breathe. He did not move. The dogs lost him. When Zachariah crawled out at sunset, something was different. He was alive. He was free. And he was completely alone in a world that wanted him dead. What Zachariah did not know, what none of them could know, was that this moment marked the end of the boy and the beginning of the ghost. Freedom did not welcome Zachariah Creed. It tested him. West Texas in the early 1860s was not the land of opportunity people spoke about in whispers. It was a raw, unfinished place, scrub desert and broken hills, long distances without water, and a sky so wide it made men feel small. Law ended where the forts thinned out. Beyond that, survival belonged to whoever learned fastest. Zachariah moved at night and hid by day, not because anyone was chasing him anymore, but because habits formed under terror do not fade quickly. He slept in dry creek beds, under thorn bushes, inside shallow caves barely large enough to turn around in. Hunger followed him constantly, a dull ache that never fully went away. The first weeks nearly killed him. He drank from muddy streams and vomited until there was nothing left in his stomach. He ate berries that burned his mouth and left him shaking with fever. He learned quickly which mistakes brought pain and which brought death. Pain could be survived. Death could not. The wilderness did not hate him. It did not care. That indifference was a strange kind of mercy. Zachariah learned to read the land the way he once read the faces of overseers. Bent grass meant animals had passed recently. Birds circling meant water or carrion. Silence, true silence, meant danger. He learned to move without leaving tracks, to cross rocky ground instead of sand, to wade upstream through water so dogs could not follow his scent. More than once, men tried to claim him. White drifters. Outlaws. Men who recognized the value of a lone black boy with no papers and no witnesses. One offered food and a blanket, then reached for rope. Another smiled too easily and spoke of work far to the east. Zachariah learned his first real lesson in killing during those encounters. The first time he cried afterward, not from guilt but from shock. The second time he shook less. By the third, his hands were steady. Each time, something inside him hardened and rearranged itself, as if his body were learning a language it had always been meant to speak. By 15, he was no longer a boy wandering blindly. He was becoming dangerous. In the spring of 1863, half dead from fever, Zachariah collapsed near a canyon fire that did not belong to him. The man sitting there did not move when Zachariah fell into the dirt. He watched quietly, rifle across his knees, revolvers worn smooth by decades of use. His hair was gray. His face carried scars that told stories without words. "You look like death," the man said at last. "You planning to die here?" "Not yet," Zachariah rasped. The man smiled, not kindly but knowingly. "Good. Living's harder." He tossed Zachariah food. That man was Joaquin Esperanza, though most people who knew his name believed he had been dead for years. He had fought along the border during the Mexican-American War, then against it, then against everyone. He had been hunted, betrayed, buried in rumors and reborn in absence. Revenge had shaped him once. Then it had emptied him. Joaquin let Zachariah stay. At first it was survival. Food, water, rest. Then Joaquin started asking questions. "You carry hate like a weapon," he said one night, poking at the fire. "Who taught you that?" Zachariah told him everything. His mother, the whip, Grace, Samuel, the list. When he finished, the fire had burned low. Joaquin nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. "But wanting justice and surviving long enough to claim it are two different things." "Then teach me," Zachariah said. "Or let me die." Joaquin stared at him for a long time. "I walked away from this path," he said finally. "But it seems it followed me anyway." The training lasted 4 years. Joaquin did not teach gently. He taught with pain, exhaustion, and repetition. Zachariah learned to fight with hands, knives, sticks, anything that could be turned into a weapon. He learned where the human body breaks and how little force it takes when applied correctly. He learned guns next, drawing without thought, shooting while moving, reloading blind, clearing jams by touch. Joaquin did not praise skill, only correction. When Zachariah put 6 bullets through a playing card in seconds, Joaquin said only, "Adequate." The hardest lessons were not physical. They were about patience. "Revenge is not fire," Joaquin said one evening. "Fire burns fast and dies. Revenge is a coal. You carry it. You feed it slowly. You wait." Zachariah learned to wait. By the time he turned 20, the boy from Whitmore Estate was gone. In his place stood a man shaped by wilderness, violence, and memory. Joaquin gave him 2 pistols. "When you are finished," he said, "if you survive, leave this path." Zachariah nodded. 3 days later he rode east. The first name on his list was Thomas Birch, and Texas was about to remember what it had tried to bury. It took Zachariah Creed nearly 2 months to find Thomas Birch. Texas was large, and men like Birch were good at disappearing after the war. Overseers scattered when slavery collapsed, slipping into ranch work, saloons, deputy badges, any place where violence was still useful and questions were not asked. Zachariah did not rush. Joaquin's lessons guided every step. Watch first. Learn patterns. Strike once. Birch had drifted west and settled in a sun-bleached town called Dusty Creek, a place with 1 main street, 2 saloons, and more guns than laws. He worked cattle now, drank heavily, and told stories about keeping order back when black bodies were legal tools. Zachariah watched him for a week. Birch woke late, drank early, played cards in the same saloon every afternoon. He carried a pistol, but his hand was slow. Alcohol had dulled his reflexes. Age had softened him. The whip hand that once swung with pleasure now trembled when lifting a glass. On the 7th day, Zachariah entered the saloon. The room quieted immediately. A black man in a white saloon was rare. A black man dressed entirely in black, with 2 pistols worn openly and no trace of hesitation, was something else. Zachariah crossed the floor slowly. Birch sat at a card table with 3 men. Laughter died. Chairs scraped backward. "Thomas Birch," Zachariah said. Birch squinted, irritated. "Who wants to know?" "You worked as an overseer on the Whitmore plantation," Zachariah said. August 18, 1858. Something flickered in Birch's eyes. Memory. "You whipped a woman named Abigail 37 times?" Zachariah continued calmly. "She died that night." Birch's hand moved. Too late. Zachariah's pistol was already drawn. The speed was unreal. One moment his hands were empty. The next, death stared Birch in the face. "Don't," Zachariah said quietly. "I wouldn't." The saloon froze. "Who are you?" Birch whispered. Zachariah leaned closer. "Abigail was my mother. My name means God remembers." Recognition hit Birch like a blow. "No," he breathed. "No, I was just doing my job." "You enjoyed it," Zachariah said. Birch begged. Apologized. Promised change. Promised money. Zachariah listened until the words ran dry. "My mother begged too," he said. "You did not stop." The gunshot cracked like a split log. Birch collapsed forward, blood pooling across the cards. Zachariah holstered his weapon and walked out into the sun. By nightfall his name did not matter. The story did. A black man had executed a white man in daylight and vanished. The first wanted posters appeared within a week. $500 reward. They called him the Black Ghost. Zachariah moved east. The next name was William Crawford. Crawford lived well. Houston. Church on Sundays. Business deals midweek. Slavery had ended, but men like him adapted easily. Wealth washed blood clean when enough time passed. Zachariah watched Crawford for 3 weeks. He learned schedules, guards, habits. Every Tuesday evening, Crawford attended a private club, alone. That was enough. Zachariah entered through a rear window as servants prepared dinner. He moved like shadow, silent and precise. Crawford sat alone with a drink when the door closed behind him. "You're him," Crawford said immediately. "I know why you're here." Zachariah fired once. Crawford screamed as the bullet shattered his wrist. "That was mercy," Zachariah said. "Now answer. Where is Grace?" "My sister." Crawford sobbed. "I don't know," he said. "I sold too many. She could be anywhere." Zachariah searched his face. Truth. Grace was gone forever, lost in the machinery of slavery. Something inside Zachariah went colder than it had ever been. "You don't even remember her," he said softly. Crawford tried to bargain. Zachariah raised his pistol. "When you get to hell," he said, "tell them God remembers." Crawford fell. The killings continued. Overseers, sheriffs, men who had made careers out of cruelty. Each death was precise. One bullet, one message. The legend grew. Some said Zachariah was more than one man. Some said he was already dead. Some said he was justice wearing human skin. The bounty climbed. $1,000, $2,000, $5,000. Rangers hunted him. They failed. By 1875, only one name remained. Colonel Henry Whitmore. And Whitmore knew it. He fortified the plantation ruins. Hired 20 gunmen. Turned his former kingdom into a fortress. "Let him come," Whitmore said. "I'll finish what I started." On September 15, 1875, Zachariah came. What happened that night ended a legend. And began something far more unsettling. Colonel Henry Whitmore did not sleep on the night of September 15, 1875. Sleep belonged to men who believed tomorrow was guaranteed. Whitmore sat in the parlor of the decaying mansion with a glass of whiskey shaking in his hand, listening to the sounds of guards pacing outside. The house that had once hosted elegant dinners now smelled of mildew, sweat, and old fear. Curtains hung in tatters. Paint peeled from the walls like shedding skin. 20 gunmen had been hired. Men with reputations. Men who killed for money and asked no questions. They were positioned at windows, behind barricades, along the perimeter of what used to be cotton fields. Whitmore told himself this was enough. He told himself that a former slave, no matter how vicious, could not face 20 armed men and live. What he did not admit even to himself was that he had been afraid for 2 years. Afraid of footsteps in the dark. Afraid of shadows that moved wrong. Afraid of a name he never spoke aloud. Zachariah approached from the west. The fields were overgrown now, choked with weeds where cotton once grew. He moved low and slow, using memory as much as terrain. He remembered where the ditches lay, where the ground dipped, where guards would assume no one could cross unseen. The first shot came from darkness. One guard dropped without a sound. The second never heard it coming. Within minutes, confusion spread. Men shouted. Lanterns swung wildly. Gunfire cracked into empty night. Zachariah circled. He was patient. Every shot counted. A man stepped into lamplight, dead. Another leaned out a window, dead. A third ran toward the kitchen, dead. Panic replaced discipline. Men fired blindly, emptying revolvers at shadows that were already gone. Zachariah shattered lanterns one by one. Darkness swallowed the house. Smoke rose as the kitchen caught fire, flames licking toward the sky. By midnight, 8 men lay dead. The rest barricaded themselves inside. Whitmore huddled in the parlor, sweating through his collar, listening to the sounds of his hired guns dying. Every gunshot felt closer. More personal. Then the voice came. "Come. Steady. Certain." "Send out Whitmore," it said from the darkness. "The rest of you can leave." Silence followed. The gunmen looked at one another. They had been paid for danger, not for suicide. One of them grabbed Whitmore by the arm. "No," Whitmore screamed. "You can't." "We can," the man said, shoving him toward the door. The door opened. Whitmore fell into the dirt of his own yard. The door slammed shut behind him. The house went quiet. Zachariah stepped out of the shadows. Whitmore looked up and screamed. The man standing before him was tall, dressed in black, his face unreadable. The eyes, those eyes, were exactly as Whitmore remembered from childhood glances at the quarters. "Please," Whitmore sobbed. "Please don't kill me." Zachariah said nothing. He thought of Abigail's voice, Grace's hands, Samuel's rope. 17 years had led to this moment. He raised his gun, then lowered it. "I'm not going to kill you," Zachariah said. Hope flooded Whitmore's face. "No," Zachariah continued. "You're going to live." Confusion replaced relief. "You'll live here," Zachariah said quietly, "in this ruin, watching everything you built rot. You'll wake up every day knowing a slave stood over you and spared you." He leaned closer. "Death is mercy. You don't deserve it." Behind them, the mansion burned. Whitmore was found the next morning wandering the ashes, muttering about a man in black. He lived 8 more years. 8 years of fear. As for Zachariah Creed, the killing stopped. The ghost vanished. Some said he died in Mexico. Others said Canada. Some said he never existed. But among black communities, another story endured. That he returned west. That he laid down his guns. That he chose to remember, without killing. Whether that is true does not matter. What matters is this. Slavery believed its crimes would be forgotten. Zachariah Creed proved that memory can be a weapon. And some debts, no matter how long buried, always come due. The night Whitmore's plantation burned did not end Zachariah Creed's story. It multiplied it. By morning, the ruins were crawling with men, former gunfighters, neighbors, deputies, anyone drawn by smoke and rumor. 8 bodies were counted. Some burned. Some shot clean through the head. No one could explain how a single man had done it. But everyone knew who had done it. Fear does not need proof. It only needs repetition. Within weeks, the name Zachariah Creed began circulating openly for the first time. Not whispered. Not guessed. Spoken. White newspapers described him as an animal. A savage. A demon created by chaos after the war. Editors wrote that slavery had kept order, and emancipation had unleashed monsters like him. What they never asked was what had made him. Among black communities, the story moved differently. Old men told it in churchyards. Women whispered it while washing clothes. Mothers spoke his name softly to children who had never known chains but still felt their echo. "He remembers," they said. He came back. Zachariah did not disappear after Whitmore. He changed. For the first time since his escape, he had no list, no clear direction. The vengeance that had carried him for years burned lower now, no longer sharp, no longer focused. Joaquin had warned him about this moment, the hollow space that comes after the last enemy falls. Killing had given him purpose. Now purpose was gone. He rode west again, drifting through border towns, ranch country, and places that barely existed on maps. He worked when he needed food. He slept under open sky. He listened more than he spoke. That was when people began to find him. Not bounty hunters. Not lawmen. Victims. A woman in San Antonio whose husband had been beaten to death by a former patrolman who now wore a badge. A man near Galveston whose daughter had vanished into domestic servitude after emancipation. Sold quietly, illegally, but permanently. An entire church congregation that knew the name of a plantation owner who had murdered slaves during the war and walked free afterward. They did not ask him to kill. They asked him to remember. Zachariah listened. He verified stories the way Joaquin had taught him, slowly, carefully, without emotion. He learned which men truly deserved his attention and which were simply hated for surviving. And when the stories were true, he acted. These were not spectacles. No saloons. No witnesses. Men vanished on lonely roads. Men were found dead in barns, fields, offices. Always one bullet. Sometimes a word carved nearby. Remembered. Texas responded with fury. The governor doubled the bounty. Texas Rangers were deployed in numbers not seen since the war. Entire posses moved through black communities, questioning, threatening, beating information out of anyone they suspected of helping the ghost. They never caught him. Because Zachariah no longer moved alone. Former slaves sheltered him. Freedmen passed messages. Mexican traders hid him across borders. A network formed without names or leaders, bound only by shared memory and shared silence. What the Rangers did not understand, what they could never understand, was that Zachariah Creed was no longer just a man. He was an answer. An answer to centuries of unpunished violence. An answer to the belief that time erased guilt. An answer to the lie that freedom meant justice had been served. By 1876, the killing slowed again. Not because Zachariah was tired. Because something else was happening inside him. He began sparing men. Not out of mercy, but calculation. Fear spreads further when death becomes uncertain. Men woke at night imagining footsteps. Former masters locked doors and drank themselves into ruin. Some fled Texas entirely. The system that had once hunted him was now afraid to sleep. And that frightened Zachariah more than killing ever had. Because fear, unchecked, becomes something else. It becomes a mirror. And for the first time, Zachariah began to see Joaquin Esperanza's face, not as teacher, but as warning. By the winter of 1876, Texas had stopped asking if Zachariah Creed existed. The question became how many of him there were. Rangers rode in pairs, then in squads, then in numbers that looked like small armies. They searched riverbeds, canyons, abandoned forts. They questioned freedmen with threats and white ranchers with bribes. Newspapers printed sketches that contradicted one another: too tall, too thin, too scarred, too fast. Fear does that. It distorts. Zachariah watched them from a distance. He learned their routes the way he once learned overseers' moods. He studied the way lawmen talked around campfires, who bragged, who listened, who drank too much and forgot to check behind them. He did not rush. He never rushed now. What changed was not the hunt. It was him. The first sign came on a cold morning near the Nueces River. A man named Elias Mercer had been brought to Zachariah by 3 different people, all independent of one another. Mercer had been a patrolman during the war, known for breaking men with rifle butts and dragging women from cabins at night. After emancipation, he became a deputy. Respectable. Married. 2 children. Zachariah followed him for days. He found evidence. Scars that spoke louder than testimony. Old patterns repeating themselves under a new badge. The night he entered Mercer's house, the man woke before Zachariah reached the foot of the bed. They stared at one another in the dark. "You're him?" Mercer whispered. Zachariah raised his pistol. Then Mercer's wife stirred. A child coughed in the next room. Zachariah froze. The man on the bed began to cry, not begging, not bargaining, just crying. The sound unsettled Zachariah more than screams ever had. He lowered the gun. "You will leave this town," Zachariah said. "Tonight." Mercer nodded frantically. "You will never wear that badge again. You will never touch another black body. And if I hear your name whispered one more time." He did not finish. Zachariah left. Mercer vanished by dawn. That should have felt like mercy. It felt like failure. The coal Joaquin had warned him about burned unevenly now. Some nights it flared. Others, it smothered itself into ash. Zachariah began to feel the weight of every choice, every man spared, every man killed. He dreamed more. His mother's voice no longer sang. Samuel no longer smiled. Grace never spoke at all. Instead, they watched him. Texas changed around him. White fear hardened into policy. New laws appeared: vagrancy statutes, loitering rules, labor contracts enforced by guns. Slavery had ended on paper, but its shadow learned to wear uniforms. Zachariah saw the pattern clearly. Kill one man and another replaced him. Kill 10 and the system adjusted. Revenge could punish individuals. It could not dismantle machinery. That realization cut deeper than any wound. He met Ruth Holloway in a church cellar outside Austin. She was older, her hands scarred from years of work. She ran routes, quiet ones, helping people move north or disappear west. She recognized Zachariah immediately. "You're burning out," she said. He did not deny it. "You're useful," Ruth continued, "but fear only buys time. What people need is space." Zachariah listened. That night he did not kill. He escorted a family across a river instead. A father. A mother. 2 children who walked without speaking, eyes wide with terror and hope tangled together. Something inside him shifted. He began choosing differently. Not less carefully, differently. Sometimes that meant death. Sometimes disappearance. Sometimes protection. The Rangers noticed. The killings were no longer predictable. That terrified them more than certainty ever had. By 1877, Zachariah Creed was no longer just hunted. He was debated. Was he justice? Was he chaos? Was he already dead? Zachariah did not care. But he began to wonder something Joaquin had warned him about long ago. What happens when a weapon outlives its war? The question followed him west. Toward mountains he had not seen in years. Toward a cabin that might still be standing. Toward a man who had taught him how to kill, and when not to. What Zachariah did not know was that the next choice he made would not involve a gun. And it would cost him more than blood ever had. The mountains came back into Zachariah's life the way memory does, quietly without asking permission. By late 1877, winter pressed down hard on the western ranges. Snow gathered in the high cuts and melted into ice by nightfall. The air thinned. Sound carried differently. Even fear felt distant here, dulled by altitude and cold. Zachariah rode alone. He had not planned to return. He told himself it was coincidence, a need for shelter, a route chosen by weather and instinct. But as the canyon narrowed and the familiar bend appeared, he knew the truth. Some debts are not written on lists. The cabin still stood. The roof sagged more than he remembered. One shutter hung loose, tapping softly in the wind. The garden had gone wild, hardy plants choking out everything delicate. Life surviving without guidance. Zachariah dismounted slowly. He listened. No fire. No movement. No rifle cocking behind the door. He entered. The smell hit him first. What? Old smoke. And something else, stillness that had gone too long without breath. Joaquin Esperanza lay on the bed, wrapped in blankets, eyes closed, hands folded over his chest as if he had arranged himself that way. He looked smaller than Zachariah remembered. Age had finally claimed what bullets never could. Zachariah stood there for a long time. He did not speak. He did not kneel. He did not pray. He remembered Joaquin's voice by the fire. His patience. His warnings. Killing changes you. Revenge is a coal. Zachariah buried him on a rise overlooking the canyon. He dug the grave alone, the way he had buried Samuel years before. The earth was hard. His hands bled. He did not stop. When it was finished, he placed Joaquin's old rifle across the mound. "You told me there was no coming back," Zachariah said quietly. "You didn't tell me what staying would cost." The mountains answered with silence. Zachariah stayed through winter. He hunted, fixed the roof, cleared part of the garden. Nights were long and heavy with thought. Without the constant motion of fear, memories pressed closer. He thought about the men he had killed, the ones he spared, the ones who had replaced them. He thought about the children he had helped cross rivers, the families who had vanished into safe darkness. And he understood something that had eluded him before. Violence had been his language because it was the only one the world spoke to him as a child. But it was not the only language that existed. In the spring, trouble came to the mountains. A ranger patrol tracked rumors west. 3 men, cautious and methodical. They found the cabin. Zachariah watched them from above. They did not know who lived there. They only knew the stories. The shape of fear had led them this far. The rangers approached with rifles ready. Zachariah stepped into view. Hands empty. The lead ranger froze. "You," he said. "Don't move." Zachariah did not move. They stared at one another across years of blood. "You could shoot us," the ranger said. "Yes," Zachariah replied. "Why don't you?" Zachariah looked past them, to the valley, to the land that had remade him twice. "Because killing you wouldn't change anything," he said. The rangers hesitated. They had expected a monster. A gun. A final stand. They found a man who looked tired. They left. No shots fired. No report filed. No legend satisfied. Zachariah understood then what Joaquin had meant. Walking away was not surrender. It was defiance of a system that expected blood forever. By 1878, the stories changed. People still whispered about Zachariah Creed, but now they spoke of a protector, not a ghost. Someone who appeared when needed and vanished before gratitude could form. Someone who moved families, not bodies. Texas wanted him gone. The mountains kept him hidden. And slowly, quietly, the legend softened. That frightened the authorities more than violence ever had. Because myths that end in silence cannot be controlled. What Zachariah did not know was that the world beyond the mountains was preparing one last attempt to define him. And this time it would not come with guns. It would come with history. With paper. With lies. With erasure. The men who could not kill Zachariah Creed decided to do something far safer. They erased him. By 1878, the killings had slowed enough for officials to claim victory. Rangers filed reports heavy with certainty and light on facts. Editors printed confident headlines about order restored and the end of the Black Ghost. Bounties were quietly withdrawn. Patrols reassigned. The story was finished. On paper. What followed was not silence. It was replacement. New records appeared in county offices, written in neat ink by men who had never seen blood dry in the dirt. Names were misspelled, dates adjusted, locations blurred. Incidents that had terrified towns for years were attributed to bandit disputes or unknown assailants. In some ledgers, the victims were described as respected citizens, their past scrubbed clean by phrasing alone. Thomas Birch became a ranch worker killed in a bar fight. William Crawford became a merchant found dead under mysterious circumstances. The plantation siege was blamed on outlaws, plural, faceless. Zachariah's name vanished. That was the point. History, when threatened, does not deny. It relabels. Zachariah learned this from the margins. From women who cleaned offices and overheard conversations. From printers who slipped pages aside. From Ruth Holloway, who brought him folded clippings marked with careful fingers. "They're closing the book," she said. "They always do." Zachariah read the lies slowly. He felt no rage, only a steady understanding. This was the system he had fought his entire life. It survived whips and war by learning how to speak politely. "Let them," he said. "People who matter already know." Ruth studied him. "You're disappearing." That was always the plan. He did not mean death. He meant absence. The most dangerous thing Zachariah could become now was untraceable. He burned what little he owned that tied him to movement. Maps, notes, names remembered only on paper. He stopped traveling with weapons visible. He learned to look like a laborer again. Like nothing at all. Months passed. In Black communities, the story changed shape. It became quieter. More careful. Told to children not as a call to vengeance, but as a lesson. They tried to forget, elders would say. But forgetting is a choice. Zachariah Creed became less a man and more a measure. If a patrolman disappeared after abusing prisoners, people asked, did he remember? If a family crossed safely under moonlight, someone whispered, he remembers. Zachariah heard these stories secondhand. He never confirmed them. He never corrected them. Myths are stronger when they do not ask permission. The Rangers tried one last time to fix the narrative. In 1879, a pamphlet circulated claiming Zachariah had been killed near the border, shot while resisting arrest, buried without ceremony. No body was shown. No witness named. The lie was efficient. Most white Texans accepted it gladly. Black Texans did not. Too many people had seen him after the supposed date of death. Too many quiet debts had been settled. Too many families had crossed rivers they could not have crossed alone. Zachariah read the pamphlet by firelight and smiled for the first time in years. "They want me dead," he said to Ruth. "Good." "Why?" she asked. "Because dead men don't ask questions." He moved again, west, then north, then back into spaces where records thinned and names lost meaning. He worked fields under false names. He helped build churches he never entered. He slept lightly and dreamed less. The dreams that came were different now. No ropes. No whips. No screaming. Sometimes he saw Grace, not as a child but grown, her face imagined rather than remembered. In the dream she did not speak. She simply stood at a distance, watching. Zachariah began to understand that memory was not only about the past. It was about responsibility. The world wanted a monster or a martyr. He chose to be neither. In 1880, Ruth brought him one last bundle of papers. Old plantation maps. A ledger salvaged from Whitmore's ruins. Names. Dates. Accounts. "They'll disappear too," she said. "Soon." Zachariah looked at the pages for a long time. Then he handed them back. "Hide them," he said. "Don't publish. Don't announce." "Why not?" "Because truth doesn't survive spotlights," he replied. "It survives hands willing to carry it." That winter, Zachariah Creed vanished in a way even rumor could not follow. No sightings. No whispers. No corrections. The legend did not end. It settled. What historians would later call absence was, in truth, a deliberate refusal to be owned by narrative, white or black, violent or redeemed. Zachariah left behind no grave anyone could find. No confession. Only a question history never answered properly. What happens when the people who were supposed to disappear choose when and how they are remembered? By the time 1881 arrived, Zachariah Creed no longer recognized the man Texas had feared. That was not because he had softened. It was because fear had stopped shaping him. He lived now in motion so quiet it barely counted as travel. A week in one place, a season in another. He took work that left no record, mending fences, hauling stone, clearing land that no one wanted yet. He slept light, ate little, listened constantly. The coal inside him still burned, but it no longer demanded blood. Zachariah had learned something the system never anticipated, that rage can evolve. That survival, once mastered, creates space for choice. And choice, when exercised freely, terrifies power more than violence ever did. He felt the change most clearly when he stopped carrying the pistols Joaquin had given him. At first they remained close, wrapped, cleaned, checked by habit. Then they stayed behind more often. Finally, one morning, he buried them beneath a mesquite tree near a creek whose name he never learned. The ground accepted them without comment. That night, Zachariah slept deeper than he had in years. He dreamed of Whitmore Estate, not burning, not screaming, but empty. Cotton fields reclaimed by weeds. Cabins collapsed into earth. Silence settling like dust after a storm. When he woke, he understood what had been loosening inside him for months. Revenge had carried him to this point, but it could not carry him forward. The world beyond the mountains had not improved. It had reorganized. New laws tightened around black bodies. New contracts bound men to land through debt instead of chains. New prisons rose where plantations once stood. Zachariah saw all of it, and for the first time he understood that killing individual men, no matter how deserving, would never outpace a system designed to replace them. That did not mean stopping. It meant changing the fight. Zachariah began working with people like Ruth Holloway without standing at the center. He carried messages, drew maps that never existed on paper, walked families through dangerous places and then vanished before gratitude could slow them down. He taught boys how to read terrain, how to disappear, how to watch without being seen. He taught girls how to remember names, quietly, carefully, without letting memory turn into fire. Anger will keep you alive, he told them, but it cannot be the only thing you carry. Some listened, some didn't. That was not his decision to make. What changed most was how Zachariah saw himself. He no longer measured his worth by the men he had ended. He measured it by the nights when no one had to run because he was there. By the mornings when a road once watched by patrols lay empty. The Rangers stopped looking for him entirely. They had declared him dead too many times to reverse course without admitting failure. Bureaucracy sealed the lie more effectively than bullets ever could. Zachariah took advantage of that. He became a laborer in ledgers, a silhouette in memory, a rumor that lost edges with each retelling. In the fall of 1882, he visited a church outside Waco where an elderly woman recognized his eyes. "You're Abigail's boy," she said quietly. Zachariah stiffened. "No one has called me that in years." She smiled sadly. "She sang while she worked," the woman said. "We never forgot." Zachariah nodded. That night, he realized something else he had been holding without knowing it. Shame. Shame for surviving when others had not. Shame for the violence he had chosen. Shame for the parts of himself that felt emptied out by necessity. He let that go too. Survival is not betrayal. Neither is change. The last thing Zachariah released was the need to be understood. He stopped explaining. Stopped correcting stories. Stopped caring whether history judged him kindly or at all. Because history was not his audience. People were. By 1883, the name Zachariah Creed appeared nowhere, not even in whispers that could be traced. He existed only in outcomes. A road that stayed open, a family that arrived intact, a patrol that turned back without knowing why. Somewhere along the way, vengeance transformed into vigilance. And vigilance, practiced long enough, became something close to peace. Not happiness. Peace. The kind earned, not granted. What Zachariah did not know, what he could not have known, was that the story was preparing to close around him anyway. Not through death. Not through capture. But through memory choosing its final shape. Because legends do not end when men do. They end when the world decides what to do with them. And the world was still deciding. Zachariah Creed lived long enough to watch the world forget him on purpose. By 1884, the country had moved on to newer fears. Railroads cut across land that once swallowed men whole. Towns hardened into cities. Violence became bureaucratic, stamped with seals and signatures. The kind that did not leave bodies in the road, only numbers on paper. Zachariah moved with it, not against it. He learned how to exist where records mattered more than witnesses. He took work that required hands, not names. He learned when to speak and when to let silence do the work. He learned how to be useful without being visible. People still needed help. They always would. But they did not need a legend anymore. Legends attract light. Light brings attention. Attention brings force. Zachariah became something smaller and stronger. A presence. He spent seasons in places that never wrote him down. Logging camps, river crossings, half-built towns where men came and went faster than memory could hold them. He slept in barns. In empty churches. In rooms offered without questions because the person offering already understood. He did not carry weapons anymore. Not because he had forgotten how to use them. Because he had learned when not to. There were nights, though, when the old instincts stirred. When he woke with his heart racing, certain someone was standing over him. In those moments, his body remembered before his mind did. He would sit up, still as stone, listening to the dark until it released him. The dreams changed again. Samuel stopped swinging. Abigail stopped bleeding. Grace began to age. In the dreams, Grace walked beside him through places he did not recognize, streets lined with brick, rooms filled with desks and chalkboards, churches where no one sat in the back because of skin. She never spoke. She only walked, her hand brushing his sleeve as if to say, "Keep going." Zachariah woke from those dreams with a strange ache. Not grief. Distance. In 1886, he returned briefly to Houston under another name. The city had swallowed the old plantation routes whole. Whitmore Estate existed only as parcels and land records. The pecan tree was gone. The quarters erased. There was nothing left to point at and say, "This is where it happened." That, he understood, was the final cruelty. When places disappear, memory has to work harder. He stood at the edge of a street where grace had been sold and felt nothing like closure. Only a quiet responsibility. To carry what the land no longer would. Years passed. Zachariah aged in ways that surprised him. Not just in the stiffness of joints or the lines on his face, but in the way time loosened its grip on urgency. He no longer counted years by danger. He counted them by continuity. Who was still alive? Who was still free? Who had not been taken back by systems that learned how to rename chains? He never married. Not because he could not love, but because love roots you and roots leave traces. He cared deeply for people whose names he never learned and whose futures he would never see. That was enough. In 1890, a young man asked him once quietly if the stories were true. "Were you really him?" Zachariah looked at the boy, thin, alert, carrying anger the way he once had. "I was someone once," Zachariah said. "That doesn't mean I am that someone now." The boy nodded, understanding more than the words alone carried. That was the last time Zachariah spoke about the past directly. After that, he let the story drift. Somewhere in the early 1890s, Ruth Holloway died. The routes she ran were taken over by others she had trained. Zachariah attended the burial under a name that meant nothing to the preacher. He stood at the back, hat in hand, and felt the weight of another witness gone. With Ruth's passing, the last person who knew him fully was gone. That should have frightened him. Instead, it felt complete. Zachariah understood then what he had been doing all along. He was not surviving for himself anymore. He was surviving so that the story would never belong entirely to those who wanted to erase it. In 1893, he walked west one final time. Not fleeing. Not hiding. Choosing. He returned to the mountains where Joaquin Esperanza had once waited by a fire and decided not to kill a dying boy. The cabin was gone now, collapsed into itself, reclaimed by weather and time. The garden had disappeared completely. Only the canyon remained. Zachariah sat there for a long time. He did not speak. He did not ask forgiveness. He simply stayed. No one knows exactly when Zachariah Creed died. There is no grave with his name. No certificate. No final witness. Some said he lived into the new century. Others said he lay down one winter and did not rise again. A few insisted he never died at all, that men like him simply fade until they are indistinguishable from the land itself. What is certain is this. When the stories finally stopped being told out loud, they did not stop existing. They settled. They waited. Because memory does not need a body to survive. It only needs someone willing to carry it forward. History never recorded the end of Zachariah Creed. There was no announcement. No headline. No notice folded into a county ledger. The kind of life he lived does not conclude neatly. It thins. It disperses. It becomes something carried instead of something witnessed. Years later, when scholars wrote about the period, they described the violence of Reconstruction as chaotic and directionless. They cataloged riots, reprisals, lynchings, and laws that replaced chains with contracts. They measured suffering in statistics and footnotes. They did not mention Zachariah. Not by name. But they described the fear that settled into certain men, the way former overseers moved towns suddenly, the way patrolmen resigned without explanation, the way entire families crossed rivers and were never seen again. They wrote about communities that learned to move quietly, to protect their own, to remember without shouting. They did not know why those patterns existed. But patterns are evidence. In black families across Texas, a different accounting survived. It lived in kitchens and church basements, in warnings given to sons, in prayers whispered by women who had learned that justice did not arrive on schedule. Remember, they said. Someone is counting. The name Zachariah Creed was not always spoken. Sometimes it was avoided entirely, replaced by gestures or pauses. A look exchanged. A sentence left unfinished. Because legends do not need repetition to remain powerful. They need recognition. Zachariah's story endured not because he killed, but because he stopped. Because at the end, when he had every reason to disappear into violence forever, he chose something more difficult. He chose restraint. He chose memory without spectacle. He chose to deny the system the ending it wanted. That choice unsettled people more than gunfire ever had. Slavery taught its victims that survival required obedience. Reconstruction taught them that freedom required silence. Zachariah taught something else entirely. That remembering is an act. That choosing when to strike, and when to walk away, is power. That a man can be shaped by violence without becoming owned by it. He was not a hero in the way stories usually demand. He was not clean. He was not gentle. He was not innocent. He was a product of a world that believed black pain was invisible. And he refused invisibility. If this story makes you uncomfortable, it should. Because it asks a question history still avoids. What happens when those who were meant to forget, remember instead? Zachariah Creed was fictional. But every force that created him was real. The overseers, the traders, the laws that allowed children to be sold and called it commerce, the silence that followed emancipation. Those were not stories. They were systems. And systems do not vanish when laws change. They adapt. They rename themselves. They ask to be forgiven without ever accounting for what they did. Zachariah's legacy is not vengeance. It is refusal. Refusal to forget. Refusal to disappear on command. Refusal to accept that time alone erases guilt. His mother whispered a name into the darkness because she believed memory mattered. It still does. And now this story lives with you. So before you leave, pause. Ask yourself what histories you carry without realizing it. Whose suffering was renamed instead of addressed. Which stories were buried because they made someone uncomfortable. If this story moved you, subscribe to Chronicles of Shadows. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss the voices history tried to erase. Share this video with someone who believes the past is finished. And in the comments, tell us where you're listening from, your city, your country, so we know how far these stories travel. Because remembrance is not passive. It is participation. These stories survive only if they are carried forward. And now, so do you?